Okay, so have you ever noticed how there's always like this list,
Yeah.
things we want to do, want to be better at?
Oh, yeah.
Like finally tackling those books piled up on the nightstand.
Right. Or finally learning that skill you've been putting off forever.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive into Atomic Habits by James Clear today.
It's such a practical guide to making those positive changes without needing, like, superhuman willpower.
Totally. No more relying on motivation alone.
Yeah.
The book really digs into how small changes can lead to big results.
It's that whole idea of consistency over intensity, right?
Clears has this analogy that really stuck with me. Imagine a plane taking off from Los Angeles, headed for New York City.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But the pilot accidentally sets the course just 3.5 degrees off. Doesn't seem like much, does it?
No, not at all.
But the tiny difference means they'd end up landing in Washington, D.C. instead.
Whoa! That's a big difference for such a small change.
It really highlights how those tiny, consistent adjustments can lead to totally different outcomes in life.
It's like suddenly you're living a completely different life because of those daily choices that might seem insignificant in the moment.
It definitely makes you rethink hitting that snooze button, huh?
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective.
So how do we actually, harness this power of tiny changes? One thing Clear talks about is the habit loop. He even mentions this experiment from way back in the 19th century with, get this, cats in puzzle boxes.
Okay, cats in boxes. I'm listening.
This guy, Edward Thorndike, he found that if a cat did something that led to a good outcome, like escaping the box, they were more likely to do it again.
Makes sense. It's like they learned what worked and just kept repeating it.
Exactly. And that's basically how habits form. Our brains are wired to repeat actions that lead to rewards.
So it's not just about willpower, it's about understanding how our brains are wired.
Right. So what does this habit loop actually look like? Like, how does it work?
There are 4 stages.
Yeah.
Cue, craving, response, and reward. Think about something simple, like reaching for a light switch in a dark room.
Okay, got it.
The darkness is the cue. It triggers a craving for light.
Right, you want to be able to see.
Your response is to flip the switch. And the reward, you can see.
Simple but effective.
Oh.
It's amazing how much we do on autopilot without even thinking about it.
Right. So the key is, if we understand this loop, we can start manipulating it to build good habits.
Okay, I like where this is going. So how do we manipulate it?
Well, one way is by playing around with those cues. Clear talks about this musician, a guitarist, who wanted to practice more consistently.
Okay, I feel that. I've definitely been there with, well, pretty much everything I try to learn.
Right, so what this guy did was he simply left his guitar in the middle of the living room where he couldn't ignore it.
Ah, so it's like a constant visual reminder. Out of sight, out of mind, but if it's right there.
Exactly. But sometimes visual cues aren't enough. What if you're the kind of person who just walks past that guitar every day?
Well, then what? What do you do?
Then it's about getting specific, moving beyond those vague aspirations to something Clear calls implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions. Sounds fancy.
It's actually pretty simple. Instead of saying, I'll practice guitar, it becomes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m., I'll practice for 30 minutes.
So it's not just hoping you'll practice.
Yeah,
It's creating a concrete plan.
exactly. You're removing the decision-making in the moment. And there's actual research to back this up. This doctor, Anne Thorndike, did a study in a hospital cafeteria.
Hospital cafeteria. Interesting.
Yeah.
What did they do? Start serving only healthy food?
Not exactly. They made some subtle changes to the layout. They put bottled water right next to the cash registers instead of soda, and they added baskets of water throughout the space.
So they basically just made water the easier, more obvious choice.
Exactly. And the results were pretty remarkable. Soda sales dropped by 11%, while water sales jumped by over 25%.
Wow, that's pretty significant for just rearranging things a bit.
It shows that our environment really does influence us more than we realize. It's constantly nudging us towards certain behaviors.
That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. It's like we have some control over our choices, but our surroundings play a big part too.
Exactly. And then there's the whole reward part of the habit loop.
Right, because if something isn't rewarding, we're probably not going to stick with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where dopamine comes in, that feel-good chemical in our brains.
Okay, dopamine. Everyone loves a good dopamine rush, right? But how does that actually work with habits?
Well, research has shown that we don't just get that dopamine hit from the reward itself.
There's more to it.
Yeah, we get a dopamine rush from the anticipation of the reward, too.
So just thinking about that delicious post-workout smoothie can get my dopamine flowing.
That's the idea. And this is where the concept of temptation bundling comes in.
Temptation bundling. Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It's basically linking an activity you want to do with one you need to do. Clear talks about this guy, Ronan Byrne, who hacked his exercise bike to only work when he was watching
Oh,
Netflix.
that's genius. So it's like turning those have-to tasks into something enjoyable.
Exactly. It could be listening to your favorite podcast only while you're working out, or giving yourself a special treat after you finish a challenging task.
I love those ideas. I already do something similar, only letting myself watch certain shows while I'm on the treadmill.
See, you're already a master of temptation bundling.
Well, I'm trying. But what about those times when even starting a task feels overwhelming? Like, I know I should go for a run, but just peeling myself off the couch feels impossible.
That's where Clear's 2-minute rule can be a game changer. It's all about shifting your focus. Instead of thinking about the whole daunting task, you break it down into something you can do in 2 minutes or less.
So instead of go for a 30-minute run, it's put on your running shoes.
Exactly. Or instead of cleaning the entire kitchen, it's load the dishwasher. The hardest part is often just getting started. Once you've taken that initial step, it's much easier to keep going.
It's like tricking your brain into taking action. I like it.
And speaking of making things easier, Clear also highlights the importance of reducing friction in our lives. He gives the example of his wife, who always sends greeting cards on time.
Okay, now that's impressive.
Yeah.
I am the worst at remembering cards.
Her secret: she keeps a box of cards pre-sorted by occasion. That way, she doesn't have to waste time searching for the right card when the time comes.
Oh, that's actually brilliant. It's like removing any obstacle that might get in the way.
Precisely. On the flip side, we can increase friction to discourage bad habits. Unplugging the TV to reduce mindless viewing is a classic example.
Ooh, that's a good one. I might need to try that. So it's all about making good habits easier and bad habits harder.
You got it.
I love that.
Yeah.
But we talk about making things easy and rewarding. What about that feeling of satisfaction? Does that matter when it comes to building habits?
Absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting. Clear talks about the work of this public health researcher, Stephen Luby. He was trying to improve sanitation in Karachi, Pakistan.
Okay, sanitation. How does that tie into habits?
He was focused on hand washing, which, as we all know now, is super important for preventing illness.
Right, but I'm guessing people weren't doing it as much as they should.
Exactly. People knew hand washing was important, but they weren't doing it consistently. So Luby got creative. He introduced a brand new soap that lathered beautifully and smelled amazing. He basically made hand washing enjoyable.
He hacked the habit loop. Did it work?
Hand washing rates skyrocketed. People loved using the new soap, and it became a more satisfying experience. It showed how powerful it can be to make a habit enjoyable, even if the benefits aren't immediate.
It's true. Our brains are wired for that instant gratification.
Right. Which can make it really tough to stick to those long-term habits that have delayed benefits.
It's so easy to choose that instant gratification, even when we know it might not be the best for us in the long run.
So the trick is finding ways to bridge that gap. One strategy Clear suggests is to find ways to attach immediate rewards to those long-term habits. Remember that couple we were talking about who wanted to save money?
The ones who loved eating out.
Yeah. They set up a special savings account called Trip to Europe, and every time they skipped a restaurant meal and cooked at home, they transferred the money they would have spent into that account.
Ooh, that's smart. Like they're rewarding themselves in the present while working towards a future goal.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to make the process itself more rewarding. But even with all those strategies, sometimes we need a little extra help staying on track. That's where habit tracking and contracts come in.
Okay, habit tracking, I get. It's like those apps that remind you to drink water or whatever.
It's more than just reminders. Think of Benjamin Franklin keeping that detailed journal where he tracked how well he was sticking to his 13 virtues.
So it's about having that visual representation of your progress.
Right. The act of tracking itself can be motivating. Plus, there's something satisfying about checking off those boxes.
I do love a good checklist. But what about those habit contracts? They still sound a bit intimidating.
They can be, but they don't have to be super formal. Clear tells the story of this entrepreneur, Brian Harris, who created a real contract with his wife and personal trainer, including financial penalties if he didn't stick to his health goals.
Whoa, that's commitment. But I'm not sure I'm ready to put money on the line.
You don't have to. Even just having an informal agreement with a friend can be effective. It's all about accountability.
It's like having a workout buddy, but for any goal you're working on.
Exactly. Just knowing someone's checking in on you can make a big difference.
It's amazing how much we've learned about how our brains work. It's not about being some kind of superhuman. It's about understanding the science and using it to our advantage.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's all about working with our brains, not against them. And that brings us back to that plane analogy. Even the tiniest adjustments, repeated consistently, can lead to massive changes in our lives.
This has been so insightful. It feels like we've gotten a whole new toolkit for self-improvement. But before we wrap up, there's one more concept I want to talk about: habit stacking. Have you heard of that?
Oh, absolutely. Habit stacking is a brilliant way to seamlessly integrate new habits into our lives by leveraging existing ones. It's like building a chain reaction of positive behaviors.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Give me an example.
Let's say you already have a solid habit of drinking coffee every morning. You can stack a new habit like meditation on top of that. So as soon as you finish your coffee, you dedicate 5 minutes to meditation.
Oh, I see. The copy becomes the cue for the meditation.
Exactly. You're basically using an existing routine as a launch pad for a new one.
That's so smart. It removes the need to create a whole new routine from scratch.
Precisely. And it makes it much more likely that you'll stick to the new habit.
Wow, this is opening up a whole new world of possibilities. What other habits can we stack?
The options are pretty much endless. It's all about getting creative and figuring out what works best for you and your existing routines.
This is fantastic. Atomic Habits has given us so much to think about.
It's a treasure trove of practical advice, for sure. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about those small, consistent steps that lead to big changes over time.
I love that. It takes the pressure off and makes self-improvement feel much more achievable.
Exactly. Small changes, big results. It really is, and it all comes down to understanding the power of tiny changes, consistently applied over time.
You know, it's funny, we were just talking about how our surroundings can influence our choices.
Oh yeah, the hospital cafeteria study, right,
Mhm.
where they rearranged things and saw those big shifts in what people were choosing.
Exactly. It really highlighted how much our environment plays a role. But what about the flip side of that, making things easier to do rather than harder?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge part of the equation. Clara calls this reducing friction, basically smoothing out any bumps in the road that might prevent us from doing what we want to do.
Okay, so like, what are some examples of that? Because let's be real, I'm the queen of procrastination.
We all have our moments, but think about it like this. Claire gives this example of his wife who's amazing at sending greeting cards on time.
Okay, color me impressed. I'm the worst with cards.
Her secret. She keeps a box of cards pre-sorted by occasion, so she doesn't have to waste time hunting for the right one when she needs it.
That's actually brilliant. It's like those meal prep kits where everything is pre-portioned and ready to go.
Exactly. By removing that tiny bit of effort, she's made it that much easier to stick to the habit.
So it's like setting yourself up for success. What are some other examples of that friction idea?
It can be as simple as laying out your workout clothes the night before, or pre-chopping veggies for the week. Or, if you want to reduce mindless screen time, try unplugging the TV or deleting those tempting social media apps from your phone.
Oh, deleting apps. That sounds a little drastic.
It might sound that way, but sometimes those small changes to your environment can make a big difference in breaking those bad habits.
Okay, I might need to try that. So it's about making the things we want to do easier and the things we don't want to do a little bit harder.
You got it. It's about consciously designing our environment to support the habits we want to build.
I love that. But sometimes, even when I've removed all the obstacles, I still struggle with just getting started on a task. Like I know I should meditate, but just the thought of sitting down and doing it feels overwhelming.
I think we all feel that way sometimes. It's that initial inertia that can be so hard to overcome. That's where Claire's 2-minute rule can be super helpful.
The 2-minute rule, what's that?
It's about shifting your focus. Instead of thinking about the whole big task, you just focus on doing something related to that task for just 2 minutes. So instead of a 30-minute meditation session, it's just setting a timer for 2 minutes and focusing on your breath.
Oh, I get it. So it's about making the entry point so small that you can't not do it.
Exactly. And once you've started, you're much more likely to keep going. It's all about building that momentum.
It's like tricking your brain into taking action.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off and makes it so much easier to get started.
Okay, I like this. We've talked a lot about making things easier, making them rewarding, even using temptation bundling. But what about the role of satisfaction? Does that matter when it comes to building habits?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually incredibly important. It ties into the whole reward system in our brains. But there's a really fascinating nuance here. Clear talks about this public health researcher, Stephen Luby, who was working on a sanitation project in Karachi, Pakistan.
Okay, sanitation.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with habits?
Well, Luby was focused on hand washing, which, as we all know now, is crucial for preventing the spread of germs. But he was facing a challenge. People knew hand washing was important, but they weren't doing it consistently.
Right, so how did he get people to change their behavior? Was it like a big public health campaign with posters and stuff?
Not exactly. He tried a different approach. He introduced this brand new soap that lathered beautifully and had this amazing, luxurious scent. He basically made hand washing enjoyable.
So he found a way to hack the habit loop by adding in that feel-good element.
Exactly. And guess what? Hand washing rates went way up. People started actually enjoying the act of washing their hands, and it became more of a satisfying experience rather than a chore.
Wow, so it's not just about the outcome, it's about the process itself.
Exactly. And that's a really important point to remember, especially when we're talking about those long-term habits where the benefits aren't immediately obvious. Our brains are wired for instant gratification, which can make it hard to stick with things that require delayed
That's
rewards.
so true. It's easy to reach for that cookie now, even if we know it might not be the healthiest choice in the long run.
It's all about finding ways to bridge that gap between instant and delayed gratification. One strategy Clear talks about is attaching immediate rewards to those long-term habits. Remember that couple who wanted to save money by cooking more at home?
Ones who loved eating out. Yeah.
They created a special savings account and labeled it Trip to Europe. Every time they skipped a restaurant meal and cooked at home, they'd transfer the money they would have spent into that account.
Oh, I love that. It's like they're giving themselves a little reward in the present while working towards a bigger future goal.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to make the journey itself enjoyable, not just the destination.
Okay, that's brilliant. But even with all those tips and tricks, sometimes I still need a little extra boost to stay on track. What about habit tracking? I've heard that can be helpful.
Oh, it definitely can be. It's more than just using an app to remind you to drink water or take your vitamins. Think about it like this. Benjamin Franklin kept this meticulous journal where he tracked how well he was living up to his 13 personal virtues each day.
So it's about having that visual record of your progress.
Exactly. It creates accountability and helps you stay focused. Plus, there's something incredibly satisfying about checking things off a list or seeing those streaks add up in a habit tracker app.
Oh, I am a sucker for a good checklist. But what about those habit contracts? I know we talked about those briefly, but they still sound kind of scary.
But they can be, but they don't have to be super formal or intense. Clear shares the story of this entrepreneur, Brian Harris, who created an actual contract with his wife and personal trainer. It included financial penalties if he didn't stick to his fitness goals.
Wow, that's taking it to a whole other level. I don't think I'm quite ready for financial penalties.
You don't have to go that far. Even just having a casual agreement with a friend or family member can be really helpful. It's all about finding someone who can provide that external accountability.
Yeah, just knowing someone's checking in on you can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not about finding the one perfect strategy. It's about experimenting and finding what works best for you. What motivates one person might not work for another.
That's a good point. We all have different things that work for us. But what I'm really taking away from all of this is that building good habits isn't about being perfect or having superhuman willpower. It's about understanding how our brains work and using that knowledge to our advantage.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about working with our brains, not against them. And remember that plain analogy. Even those tiny course corrections can lead to huge changes over time.
This deep dive has been so insightful. It feels like we've gotten this whole new set of tools for self-improvement.
I agree. Atomic Habits is full of such practical advice that you can start applying right away.
Before we wrap up, there's one more concept I want to make sure we touch on: habit stacking. Have you heard of this?
Oh, absolutely. Habit stacking is such a clever way to seamlessly integrate new habits into your life. It's all about leveraging the power of your existing routines. Think of it like building a chain reaction of positive behavior.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued now. Tell me more. How does it work?
So let's say you already have a solid habit of drinking your coffee every morning. You can stack a new habit, like meditation, onto that existing habit. So as soon as you finish your coffee, you sit down and meditate for 5 minutes.
Oh, I see. So the coffee becomes the cue for the meditation.
Exactly. You're basically using a behavior that's already automatic as the trigger for a new behavior that you want to make automatic.
That's brilliant. It totally removes the need to create a whole new routine from scratch.
It does. And because you're attaching it to something you already do consistently, it makes it much more likely that you'll actually stick with the new habit.
Wow, this is opening up a whole new world of possibilities. What other habits could we stack together? It feels like the options are endless.
They really are. It's all about getting creative and seeing what works for you and your unique daily routines.
This is amazing. Atomic Habits has given us so much to think about. It's like a blueprint for building a better life, one small habit at a time.
I agree. And the best part is, it takes the pressure off. It's not about being perfect, it's about progress.
I love that. It makes self-improvement feel much more achievable. Small changes can lead to big results.
Absolutely. It's all about those tiny, consistent actions repeated over time that can truly transform our lives.
You know, it's so easy to get caught up in those big, ambitious goals.
Right, like those New Year's resolutions that fizzle out by February.
Exactly. But Atomic Habits really shifts your perspective to those small, everyday actions.
It's like instead of trying to climb a mountain all at once, you're just focusing on taking one step at a time.
And those steps, as tiny as they might seem, can add up to some pretty incredible results over time.
Absolutely. It's all about consistency and those small wins that build momentum.
I feel like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's really been an eye-opening exploration of how we can use the science of habits to our advantage.
I agree. It's been a fascinating conversation.
And for our listeners who are ready to start putting these ideas into practice, remember those key principles we discussed. Manipulating cues, understanding rewards, reducing friction, finding ways to make things satisfying, and even using habit stacking to create those positive chain reactions.
It's a powerful toolkit for self-improvement. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress, no matter how small.
That's such a good reminder. We don't have to overhaul our entire lives overnight. It's those small, consistent changes that make the biggest difference over time.
Exactly. And even if you stumble or fall off track, don't get discouraged. Just get back up and keep going.
Progress, not perfection.
I love that. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure diving deep into Atomic Habits with you. This is definitely a book that I'll be coming back to again and again.
Me too. It's packed with so much wisdom and practical advice.
And to all our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has inspired you to embrace the power of atomic habits in your own lives. Remember, even the smallest actions, repeated consistently, can have a profound impact. So start small, stay consistent, and watch as those tiny changes transform your life.
And before we sign off, I want to leave you with that thought-provoking question we posed earlier. If you could choose one small habit to start building today, a habit that could have a significant impact on your life in the long run, what would it be?
What one small step can you take today that will set you on the path towards a brighter future?
That's it for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving for that best version of yourself.